Well, good evening. I'm Robert Wilson with Cowboy Wisdom uh, podcast. And tonight's podcast is 7 ways why repeating stories about your past is worshiping your past. Every retelling story of your past recrowns yesterday as your authority. When you repeat the story, you're never expressing, you're reenacting the story just the way it was. You hand the throne back to outdated identity and let it dictate your now. Repetition turns memory into a ritual, and the more you narrate it, the more sacred it becomes in your psyche. You're never rising, you're bowing to the emotional snapshot that shaped the old you. Storytelling reloads the exact wiring you're trying to dissolve. Each retold story activates the same neuroemotional and energetic patterns. You're never moving forward, you're rehearsing the past into permanence. Why repeating stories about your past is worshiping your past. Repeating stories about your past is the most subtle form of devotion you'll never perform, or the most subtle devotion you'll ever perform. Every time you retell the old narrative, you restruct the memories, keeping yesterday active, controlling your life now. Because you reload the emotions and the interpretations and the limitations that shape that version of you. You're never just remembering, you're reverencing it. You're giving yesterday the authority to define today. And that's something when I first got into self-help personal growth, they kept telling me to retell the story and tell how I got there. But never do they say these are the events that expanded me to here. They say this happened, and they try to make it drama. And they dramatize it. And what they don't realize is they're keeping that story active and alive with all the remnants of it. When you repeat the past, you turn memory into a master. You let the old emotional snapshots, soul tattoos, parent programming, inherited patterns dictate your perception. You're never rising, you're rehearsing yesterday, today. You're energizing the very identity you're trying to dissolve. Energetic liberation rises you out of that worship. It dissolves the gravitational pull of yesterday's patterns and opens the space where intuition leads, your clarity originates, and your sovereign presence takes command. The moment you stop repeating the story, you stop feeding the identity. And the moment you stop feeding the identity, you finally rise into the frequency of who you are. You're unborrowed, unbounded, and unmistakably free. Decrees your daredevilry, accelerates ceremonious revelations, energizes your endeavoring ardor to soar you through life and the cosmos with ease. Why worshiping your past makes you a servant to your past. Worshiping your past turns memory into your master. The moment you elevate yesterday's story, you demote today's clarity. You start taking orders from old emotions, old interpretations, and old identities that no longer match your frequencies of now. Reverencing the past forces you to obey outdated wiring. When you keep honoring old patterns, you automatically follow their rules. You're never choosing, you're complying with a version of you that no longer exists anymore. Loyalty to your past traps your power in yesterday's logic. The more you bow to what was, the less you can originate what is. You become a servant to the script you're trying to rise out of, instead of the sovereign author of your now. And that's something I've really noticed in myself. When I stopped telling the stories of my past, the old script went away to my new nowography. Nowography is a present moment, original story of yourself. 7 ways why telling stories about your past is worshiping your past. Retelling the past keeps yesterday as your narrator. Every time you tell the story, you hand the microphone back to an outdated identity. You're never expressing, you're echoing. Storytelling turns memory into mastery. When you keep repeating the same emotional snapshots, you reinforce them as the truth, and your comfort zone programming. The past becomes the authority, the present becomes the afterthought. Narrating old wounds reactivates old wiring. The moment you describe who you were, your mind reloads the patterns that shape that version. You're never rising, you're rehearsing. Why self-help, personal growth, self-improvement, and therapy teach and train you to worship your past. Because the more you talk about your past, the more you're worshiping it. Only to rise out of the past in the present moment, you got to start expressing the wisdom from the events, but you got to start expressing the pathway you choose to chauffeur yourself down. They make your past the starting point for every upgrade. Self-help and therapy begin with the assumption that you were who you were is the blueprint for you can become. The moment you start from memory, you're already bowing to it. You're never rising, you're reinforcing. They train you to analyze and decode and revisit old wounds. Instead of dissolving the emotional snapshots, they turn them into the curriculum you're living today. You end up studying your scars like a sacred scripture, reinforcing the very patterns you're trying to rise out of. They teach you to fix the identity that lived the past, never originate the one emerging now. Most personal growth frameworks assume your old needs repair. That keeps you loyal to yesterday's logic, yesterday's emotions, and yesterday's interpretations. You're not expanding, you're maintaining the museum of who you used to be. Why change, heal, create, transformation, and forgiveness keeps you being a worshiping servant to your past. Change and healing force you to start from the wound, ignoring the now. The moment you try to heal or transform, you first bow to the injury. You make the past the prerequisite for your evolution, which means yesterday still gets to run the show today. Forgiveness keeps you loyal to the storyline. You're trying to escape. To forgive, you must revisit the memory, to re-feel the emotion and re-honor the identity that lived. That's never liberation. That's emotional tithing to an outdated chapter. Transformation frameworks recycle the very identity you're trying to rise out of. They require you to analyze, decode, and fix the old you, which keeps you orbiting the same patterns. You're never going to fix yourself. You're going to rise, shine, and energize, and the here and now is going to show you the way out of the past. You're never expanding, you're maintaining the museum of who you used to be. Why thinking, knowing, learning, knowledge, and thoughts keep you stuck in worshiping your past and everything you always have done. Thinking recycles the same mental furniture you've always sat on. Doesn't that seem about right? And then when you try to shift, all you do is moving the furniture over. Thought can only rearrange what already exists. It can never originate anything new. When you rely on thinking, you're never expanding. You're reorganizing yesterday's logic and calling it progress. Knowing traps you in the comfort of what's familiar. The moment you say, I know, you lock yourself inside a past-based conclusion. Knowing becomes a shrine to what used to be true, and you end up worshiping the very limits you've been trying to rise beyond. Learning loads you with more of the same patterns. You're trying to dissolve most learning is just downloading someone else's past, someone else's interpretation, someone else's wiring. How's that the school system also? You're never liberating yourself. You're expanding the museum of everything you've always done. Why indoctrinated education teaches negativity and worshiping the past. Indoctrinated education glorifies what was and ignores what is. It trains you to memorize dead information, outdated conclusion, and historical interpretations. How do you see that in the world? As if they're sacred truth. That's never learning. That's loyalty to yesterday. You're taught to revere the past instead of originate the present. It conditions you to focus on mistakes, deficits, and what's wrong. Grades, correction, red marks, and constant evaluation. Wire your nervous system to scan for failure. Negativity becomes default. The default lens. You're never being empowered. You're being trained to doubt your original signal. That one I recognize within myself, and that's happened right now. It rewards obedience to old frameworks instead of intuitive wisdom. Indoctrinated education praises you for repeating the approved answer, never generating your own. That's worshiping the past in its purest form, bowing to inherited logic instead of rising of sovereign clarity. Why repeating stories keeps worshiping unwanted stuff. Repeating the story keeps you bowing to the version of you who lived. Every retelling restructs the old identity and hands it authority. You're never expressing, you're reenacting the past like it's still the ruler of now. How's that in your life? I see that in my life today. As much as I've risen, I got more rising to do. I'll be like the sunrise illuminating the heaven. Story repetition turns memory into ritual you perform without noticing. The more you narrate it, the more sacred it becomes in your psyche. You're never rising, you're honoring the emotional snapshot and emotional allegiance that should have been dissolved ages ago. Repetition reloads the exact wiring you're trying to outgrow, release, dissolve, destroy, whatever. Each retelling story reactivates the same patterns, emotions, and interpretations. You're never evolving, you're maintaining the shrine of what used to be. Why studying for tests creates a worshiping mindset. Studying for tests trains you to bow to pre-approved answers. You're never invited to originate insight. You're rewarded for memorizing someone else's conclusion. That's never intelligence or wisdom. That's devotion to the past, and that's being a servant and an allegiant to your emotions. The past dressed up as achievement. Tests condition you to chase validation instead of clarity. You learn to fear being wrong, so you cling to the safest, most familiar logic. That's how worship begins. by treating old information as sacred and your own intuition as suspicious. Test prep wires your brain to honor repetition over elevation. You repeat, rehearse, and regurgitate until the past feels like the only truth. Creativity collapses, curiosity shrinks, and you become a loyal servant to what has already been said. Why you are unknowingly a servant to your past and worshiping your past. You obey the emotional rules written by outdated versions of you. Old fears, old interpretations, and old, this is how I am scripts quietly run your reactions. You think you're choosing, but you're following yesterday's instructions like they're sacred law. You treat familiar suffering as truth simply because it's familiar. When a pattern feels comfortable, you mistake it for wisdom. That's how worship works. You honor the familiar even when it limits you, and you call it just how life is. You let memory outrank intuition. How do we let memory outrank intuition? Without even noticing. Your inner signal speaks in real time, but you defer to what you already lived. That's servitude. Giving yesterday the authority to override the clarity, that's trying to rise right now. Why energized listening, maverick questions, cowboy wisdom, politically incorrect inspirations, and revolutionary revelations destroy worshiping my past. They bypass your brain's loyalty to old logic and hit the raw signal underneath the energized listening and maverick questions. Never negotiate with your history. They expose how much you've been obeying it. They cut straight through the mental reruns, making it impossible to keep worshiping the version of you that lived the old story. Cowboy wisdom and politically incorrect inspiration break the emotional etiquette that protects your past. These transmissions don't tiptoe around your wounds or honor your narratives. They out the nonsense, the inherited programming, and the sacred cows you've been bowing to. So when the spell breaks, the worship ends, and you liberate you to show for yourself down to your seashores a stunning success. Revolutionary revelations detonate the identity that keeps your past in power. When a revelation hits, it doesn't fix the old you. It replaces you. It dissolves the emotional snapshots, the soul tattoos, and ancestral echoes in one clean strike. You never serve your past once you've outgrown the version of you who needed it. Why history classes teaches you to worship your past. History class trains you to treat the past as an ultimate authority. You're taught that the answers live behind you, never within you. Memorize the dates, revere the events, quote the experts. It conditions you to believe yesterday is wiser than you are, than your own inner signal. Classic worship programming. It rewards you for repeating old narratives instead of narrating new perceptions. You get praise for reciting what happened, never questioning why it still matters today. So that's a question. Why does it really matter how everybody did anything? What was the outcome? And how is that mindset and all that emotional allegiance to the past controlling today? That's how worship works. You honor the storyline, protect the interpretation, and never challenge the script. How come we're not challenging the scripts of a lot of things today is my question. It conditions you to identify with collective trauma and inherited storylines. History class never just teaches events, it teaches emotional allegiance to them events. History class never just teaches events, it teaches emotional allegiance to the events. You're trained to carry the weight, the wounds, and the worldview of people who lived centuries before you. That's not education. That's inherited devotion to a past that isn't even yours. Why worshiping my past creates emotional allegiance to your past. Worshipping your past locks your emotions into outdated loyalty contracts. When you elevate old stories, your nervous system signs up to feel the same feeling on repeat. You're never responding to life. You're pledging allegiance to emotional echoes that should have expired years ago. So how much stuff are you carrying today that should have been gone long ago? I got a lot, and I'm willing to let it go as I sail away. Reverencing your history turns old wounds into identity anchors. The moment you treat a past experience sacred, your emotion becomes its bodyguards. You defend the pain, protect the narrative, and stay emotionally loyal to a version of you that no longer exists. Emotional allegiance forms when you let memory outrank your present signals. When the past becomes a reference point, your emotions follow its lead. You're never feeling what's true, authentic now. You're feeling what was authentic then. That's how worship becomes wiring. While rising out of emotional allegiance and worshiping my past liberates me the flow of inspiration, intuition, innovation, imagination, showing my trailblazer unique talents, inner joying of my abundant lifestyle. I destroyed emotional allegiance, and worshiping your past liberates you into inspiration, intuition, innovation, imagination, trailblazer talent, and inner joying an abundant lifestyle sculpted through unmistakable energetic liberation voltage. When you break emotional allegiance, your intuition finally outranks your history. The moment you stop bowing to old emotional contracts, your inner signal gets the mic. Inspiration flows because you stop filtering it through yesterday's wounds. Intuition becomes clean, clear, immediate, and unborrowed. The perfect fuel for innovation, imagination, and trailblazer clarity. Releasing worshiping of your past frees your creative circuitry from outdated wiring. As long as you're loyal to old stories, your imagination is trapped inside yesterday's blueprint. So rise out of the emotional allegiance, and your mind becomes a frontier again. Innovation, ideas, imagination spark. Innovation ignites, and your unique talents stop hiding behind inherited programming. Liberation dissolves the emotional gravity that kept your abundance on pause. When you stop reverencing the past, your energy stops leaking into old identities. That freed up voltage, a visionary voltage, becomes inspiration, intuition, creativity, and inner joy. You start living from overflow instead of obligation. The natural habitat of a trailblazer living an abundant life is sovereign, originating, and healthy wealthy lifestyle. While energetic liberation voltage illuminated your pathways of enlightenment, suffers you on to your son of the fun splendor, liberated you from worshiping your past emotional allegiance and being a servant to your past, embodying the sovereign liberation of here and now. Energetic liberation voltage flips your inner switch from history powered to sovereign source power here and now. The moment the voltage hits your pathways of enlightenment instantly lights up like a cosmic runway. You stop navigating life with yesterday's dim flashlight and start moving with a full beam of clarity. Ignoring worshiping your past stops emotional allegiance. It's just flowing of clean, sovereign signal guiding you straight onto your next level of extravagance. It chauffeurs you out of the museum of who you used to be and drops you into the sun of the fun splendor of now. The voltage never asks you to heal, fix, or decode anything. It simply escorts you out of the servitude of your old stories and into the frequencies of inner joy, play, creativity, and intuition that run the show. You stop being the caretaker of your past and start being the curator of your here and now splendor. It dissolves the emotional contracts that kept you loyal to outdated identities and activates sovereign embodiment. Then, when the past no longer gets your devotion, your energy stops leaking backwards and your intuition sharpens your imagination, expands your innovation, ignites your unique trailblazer talents, and you breathe sun rays of amazing acumen. You become the embodied expression of sovereign liberation, radiate, original, and unmistakably alive, thriving thrill skills now and forevermore. And I am Robert Wilson, but something I discovered in this one is emotional allegiance. And how are we stuck in emotional allegiance in your life? That's when you do as your mom says. But I'm going to do a podcast next Tuesday on emotional allegiance. I want to thank you, and may you experience a very blessed weekend and enjoy your Christmas shopping.